Okay, well, I think we are going to get started. And welcome to Espresso with Carlo. I actually do have my espresso, and I'm excited to be sitting in our office in Midtown. And I was actually very excited to see traffic this morning and a bustling Midtown. And I think that's a good sign for the future and for New York's continued recovery and renaissance. So, welcome to our second Espresso with Carlo, highlighting the candidates running for citywide office, in particular, mayor and city controller. And let me particularly thank Langen Engineering for being our prime sponsor this year. And by the way, sponsorships are open. So, anybody who would like to sponsor, please do so. George Leventis and Langen, thank you. Today, we're joined by someone I know for quite some time now, Carlos Menchaca, who is a New York City councilman in the 38th district, which is Sunset Park, Red Hook, a little bit of Borough Park and Dyker Heights, and a good stretch of the Brooklyn waterfront. Carlos has been councilman for many years now. He's in his second term. Prior to that, Carlos was a top staffer for Council Speaker Christine Quinn. And before that, I had the pleasure of working closely with Carlos because when I started at Borough Hall way back when, Carlos was a capital budget and economic development coordinator. So Carlos was a capital budget and economic development coordinator. And when I became chief of staff to Borough President Marty Markowitz, I named Carlo director of capital budget and economic development. And he worked with me for many years. So, Carlos, again, I want to remind everybody that these are educational opportunities. We are not officially endorsing a candidate as an organization. So let me turn it over to my friend Carlos Menchaca, who will tell us a little bit about himself for a few minutes, and then we're going to have a dialogue, Carlos. So here's an espresso to you, my friend.
Muchas gracias and buenos días, Carlo. So good to be here with you and everyone at the Building Congress. There is something really important happening in the city as we get ready to install our next president. We're going to be installing a new city government, mayor, controller, and a whole lot of city council members. And so it's really important for me to be in front of all of you because I think there is an opportunity for engagement and education about who we are. And I am a very much a New Yorker with the passion for both understanding the connection of political power and love for our communities. And that really kind of labels my whole time in the city of New York. When I came here in 2014 after college, I immediately injected myself into city politics, working for Borough President Marty Markowitz. And as Carlo mentions, when he came in and took over as chief of staff, that was a really quick moment for you, Carlo. We got to work together.
Yeah.
And in that, I learned so much about the power of community and investing capital infrastructure money for our communities. And that has really given me a lens of how we can develop and really bring in the renaissance that we are all asking for. And specifically for this group, I want to talk to you about what I've learned. In the last few years, I want to tell you that part of the work that I've done as city council member is to bring the community in to how government works. And by doing that, we have been able to begin the construction of 7 new schools in our district, almost more than anywhere else in the entire city. And that's because community and the SCA came together and worked that out. We have put in over $24 million in public infrastructure through something called participatory budgeting that I'd love to talk to you about. And that really allows for community members to understand how capital budget works. My big ideas are the following. We need a Green New Deal here in the city of New York, and that's going to require the mayor invest billions of dollars, new dollars and whatever have been invested in the creation of new infrastructure transportation, healthcare, education, our roadways, and even thinking about something we never think about, which are our waterways. We have so much to do to activate the sixth borough. And so those are the things that I hope Carlo and I talk about. And then finally, what I want to think about are some of the most vulnerable people in the city. And those are public housing residents, immigrants, and working families who are without a job right now that can be trained quickly to be part of pipelines and new PLAs that are constructed with the city of New York to ensure that some of the most vulnerable and highly impacted by COVID communities get that economic opportunity. And so those are the things that I want to highlight immediately. I was born in El Paso, Texas, on the border of Texas and Mexico, and there, growing up in public housing, public schools, single mom, I really understood the power of government and what it can do to a family. Those are the things and values that I want to bring into this race, and I hope that we can talk more about that future that is on its way.
Great. Thank you, Carlos, and we will. So, look, I think I want to start with just a comment that the next mayor will inherit, I think, a period of New York that we haven't seen at least since 2002, when Mayor Bloomberg became mayor, but even worse. So we have three big crises. We have clearly a crisis of medical, of COVID. So that's one. We have an economic crisis that we've never seen in New York before. That's two. And then we have a racial and social justice crisis. So that's three. Let's really tackle them each one by one. Tell us how are you going to get, the medical piece of this done? What's the plan to ensure that we are ready for the next wave of vaccines? God willing, we will have everybody vaccinated, or a good portion of the population vaccinated this year. But what happens in 2022 and 23 with vaccinations? What's your plan?
So one of the things that I saw very clearly when the pandemic hit was a lack of trust of government here in the city of New York. And one of the problems that we had, it wasn't just the leadership of the Department of Health and the mayor and health and hospitals. It was also people not even understanding what was coming to them. And so what we got to do is restore trust with our communities to ensure that whenever we have a next public health crisis, that people understand the necessity for masks, the necessity for COVID tests, social distancing, so that we can, like other countries like Australia, immediately address the issue and contain a virus in the future. That's not happening. And that when I talk about political power and the love of our communities, the trust needs to be strong. The second thing is that what we also saw, and this is just through my work here in the district, was the fact that we didn't even have some of the infrastructure within the medical needs. I'm talking about ventilators, et cetera. We had to bring them from out of the country. We have an industrial business issue here. We need to bring factories that are going to be able to build that out and ensure that we can do that. The third thing I want to say is that we got to start building that biomedical, which we do here have at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and bring more money and investment to ensure that we can actually do some of this stuff ourselves here in the city of New York with over 8 million people. So this is all about investment and relationship with our communities. And the communities that I'm representing in the city council as chair of the immigration committee are including people who are non-English speakers. And I think when we can solve those issues, we can move a public health policy, public health emergency crisis forward faster with everyone on board.
And we have to do it very quickly, obviously, because time is of the essence. We put out a report over the summer that talked a little bit about the healthcare industry, life sciences, and how that is poised to play a big role in the recovery and job creation. So
it has to. It
we
absolutely
believe
has to.
everything that is critical. But let's take this to the next level, which is largest unemployment in a generation. The talk on the street is that New York is over. I clearly disagree with that. how are we going to get people jobs? We need hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We need investment. We need housing. We need transportation. We represent hundreds of businesses who represents hundreds of thousands of employees across the boroughs and the region. How are we going to put people to work, Carlos?
So what I think is important when we talk about people who are unemployed is that there is there are people who are skilled in our neighborhoods that do not have jobs. And so we're not just talking about people who are unemployed. We're talking about people who are unemployed who have incredible skills and can be trained into these jobs. When I talk about the Green New Deal, I'm talking about a massive investment. We have the ability as a city of New York, and this is something that you and I worked on, to bring more capital investment that gives us an opportunity to put a smaller fraction of that onto our yearly expenses as a city, which means that we can actually put the investment to rebuild our housing in NYCHA, to build more housing, affordable housing, to get people back to work, to build the resiliency projects like in Red Hook that have been underfunded for the last 7 years. When I'm talking about jobs, I'm talking about those jobs that are connected to a Green New Deal, a new deal for New York City paid for by the city of New York. And our rates to borrow are so good that this is different from the 70s, where we were bankrupt, where we were not able to borrow in the ways that we could, and the state had to come and bail us out. That is a different story today. And if we can understand that, then we can understand the power of our economic engine. And that the fact that the mayor last week released a budget without a massive increase in capital improvements and capital projects is a testament to how disconnected this mayor has been for the long time and what we need to make that different. Now, that pipeline can't just happen on its own. So we're going to need commitments from the unions to ensure that our local communities that have been impacted by COVID can get connected to those jobs. And that's where my plan will do that, to ensure that we use critical infrastructure within our communities, nonprofits, and people who have connections to our communities who are underemployed to get connected, trained, and building our city. This has happened before in the city, in the country. We can do it here.
Where do you see the private sector in all of it?
The private sector is 100% connected. They are the contractors that are going to kind of reconstruct, that have the relationships with communities already, that need to develop more communities. And so part of the private sector is really to understand and help communities see this vision. And I hope we can get to talk a little bit about some of that vision that we need, that communities have been asking for. Because I think it's hard to talk about this without the following realization. The political winds are changing. You are seeing incumbents removed because they're not talking about economic justice in the way that communities have been asking for. People of color, women getting access to this economic. And so private companies need to be sitting side by side with communities on the ground, listening to what the improvements that are needed, like NYCHA, like affordable housing, and actually pump, and the city needs to come in and pump that economic infrastructure and investment into it. And so I just want to see more private contractors work side by side with communities, going into communities, learning about what the needs are, and working with them to fight for that investment.
So let's stay with this. I want to go back a couple of minutes because people hear the Green New Deal and they think, the world that they live in will never be the same, that they will never be able to get on an airplane again or have a piece of steak or live the way they've lived. Do you want to tell us, in your words, what does the Green New Deal to you mean for New York City? What are the improvements that, if the next mayor says we're going to invest, billions and billions of dollars in capital in a Green New Deal, what does it mean for the city, and what does it mean for the people building, the engineers, the architects, the contractors, et cetera?
Well, first, it's going to mean a massive injection into a sector that is currently not having investment through a private market. the fact that we can bring in public dollars, and this is what a municipal, and I'm calling this a municipal Green New Deal. We're going to wait for the federal government and the state to catch on, but we have the opportunity as a city to fund our own municipal Green New Deal, capital dollars that are public dollars that can go into public projects, massive public projects under transportation, education, life and health sciences. And so it's going to allow for engineers and architects and construction agencies to be able to get to work. And because they're coming from the city, we can actually build out pipelines to jobs. So when we're thinking about things like, and you were describing more of a lifestyle, having steak and those
And
things that we can't do right now.
that's the thing that opponents will say is, so I want people to understand, how does it affect New York City?
Well, in New York City, it means that you're going to start seeing a hustle and bustle of a reimagining and an actual reconstruction of the city of New York. And I'm thinking about things that have just not been adequately funded. I'm thinking about parks and how our parks are deteriorating before our eyes. We're not pumping the kind of dollars that we need to ensure that we can get parks up and going. And when I think about COVID and what it's done for our need for open space, our open spaces need investment. Our schools need investment. This is why we were fighting for, and we are in the process of building 7 new schools in the district, because the city has just not focused enough energy and attention, which means that education will become better. And not only that, it allows us to bring in investment to things like STEAM and STEM center and education opportunities for young people to start getting oriented toward this new Green New Deal. But the last thing I want to say is climate change. One of the things that the Green New Deal talks about is really catching up with investment to the laws that we have passed at the city and at the state level to affect carbon capture. There are buildings in the city that emit incredible toxins into the air, that if we can put in city infrastructure, we can actually curb climate change in a very real way, and that's jobs. Going in and rethinking filter systems and the way that energy goes into our buildings, those all need dollars. And if we can bring in capital city dollars, we can get city New Yorkers back to work so that they can feed their families, send their kids to school, and get back into life. That's the promise of a Green New Deal in the city of New York.
Wow. Well, it sounds exciting to me. Give me a sense of some of the projects that you think would be great for to help build this Green New Deal.
Well,
So,
one is,
I know you mentioned NYCHA. Maybe start with that, and then we can talk about some other ones.
yeah, and I want to start with housing because we have a massive housing problem here. And part of that is the affordability of our housing. Right now, the mayor is relying on, and these past 2 mayors have relied on private funding, which essentially are, and this is what your team here understands, that we need private infrastructure or private financing to build our public need. With NYCHA, what we can do is actually fix NYCHA. And we are billions of dollars in debt to the deferred maintenance. If we can begin to understand that through city investment, we can actually make lives better in NYCHA. There are apartments right now that are empty because they are not inhabitable. And they're not habitable. And so what we can do is actually build more housing, get people to quality of life, get the same folks that we're trying to increase quality of life into work so that we can actually capture more rent in NYCHA. And that goes right back into it in terms of investment and for NYCHA. But now I want to talk about something else, and that's just affordable housing in general. I think the affordable housing crisis has not allowed for the city of New York to actually invest higher amounts of money to decrease the AMI. The AMIs that the MIH project has and the MIH proposal that we approved in the city council has not given New Yorkers affordable housing. The city needs to invest more to decrease the costs for contractors so that we can actually build more and better affordable housing. And that's across the entire city. What I would love to do is go back to all the rezonings and figure out how we can inject more capital funding to decrease the costs for the private sector to bring in more affordable housing for New Yorkers. That's the kind of commitment we need from the next city, the next city government. And I'd love to figure out how we bring in more private investment as well to increase affordability for those units that will connect more people. We're seeing a massive flight of New Yorkers. People are leaving the city, and the people that we need to hold here that are connected to the soul of the city are artists, are immigrants, and our public housing residents. These are the people who are the soul of the city that we need to really think about, or we're gonna lose the soul of the city.
So it's interesting. You talk about, and I want to stay with one thing you said, which is how the private sector gets involved, and oftentimes the private sector is only involved for financing. And what I know we would love the next mayor to do is when you start planning out, well, how are we going to rebuild NYCHA? How are we going to make these apartments and these buildings better? How are we going to get elevators to work so that seniors are not stuck in their apartments? Well, wouldn't it be great for the next mayor to actually sit with the person who builds elevators and understand, well, how can we get it done quicker, faster, and cheaper? Sit with the engineers that know how to do this, sit with the contractors, sit with labor, and really put the professionals together, the team, and say, I got to build, thousands and thousands of units of housing. How are we going to get it done? Well, I bet you many of our members can sit with you and your team and help you figure that out. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about the private sector. It's not just about money. It's also about talent, understanding, and really the technical understanding of how to get things done. And, many times we're brought in only when there's a crisis. So Superstorm Sandy, we need the engineers and the contractors in right away. 9/11, labor, the trades, the contractors went in and rebuilt and cleaned and everything. Imagine if we used all of this talent, not in a crisis, like to actually be forward thinking. And I hope that you'll commit to that.
I would love to commit to that. And I think what you're really pointing to is the only time that we ask for support in this kind of way is through crisis.
Right.
But it's also around investment. And if we don't have investment on the table, a conversation is not going to go anywhere. This is the engine that I'm trying to articulate here, is that if the city can put in massive amounts, and I'm talking about billions of dollars for the improvement of our public housing residents, that will allow for a conversation to go somewhere.
Right.
And at this point, it would just be a conversation to consult to nowhere. And that's what needs to change. And it can't come in the privatization of a public housing, a kind of public housing promise. It needs to come with public investment, and the city can do that now. We have the ability to borrow at levels that we have never done before, and that is how we get people back to work. And so I will commit to working with you all. And because I'm a council member now, I have the ability to have this conversation in a very real way and move the city council this year in 6 months. And I want everybody who's listening to know this, that we have the opportunity not to impact the budget and the future of the city in 2022. We have the power to do that now. We will be electing the next mayor in the Democratic primary in June and passing a city council budget at the same time. We can actually move things now and work with the city council to really bring power and our love for our communities this year. And I hope that you can all commit to working with me in the city council to make that happen. And we can actually put some pilots on the table and see how things work, so that by the time I become mayor officially, we can see some progress and move some of these things in a step 2, a phase 2, rather than starting from scratch. That's how necessary we need the public investment and how real it is in 6 months.
Great. Let's talk about transportation. Obviously, one of our pillars of our organization is building and rebuilding transportation and infrastructure. Talk to us about some of your priorities if you become mayor. What do you want to see happening? Mike Bloomberg did the 7-train extension. Mayor de Blasio did ferries. What's the Mayor Menchaca vision for transportation?
Well, we had a helicopter mayor in Bloomberg, and then we had the SUV mayor with de Blasio, and I want to be the bike mayor, someone who's going to be a pedestrian and a commuter in that way that I think you're seeing more and more New Yorkers take on for a lot of different reasons. And so what I think is one of those misunderstood things is that if we can actually build the bike network, the pedestrian network, these alternative to car infrastructure, we're talking about billions of dollars of investment that will get people out of their cars and onto the streets in a whole new way, safely with their families. And we're seeing that during COVID. So earlier you asked, how are we going to combat another COVID? And it will come. We can be ready with new infrastructure that will allow people to commute within their communities, in and out of the city in a safe way. And that includes putting a pedestrian and bike lane on the Verrazano. These are all massive public works.
We've been calling for about 30 years, I think. I remember working on that project in the 90s.
You and many people that are reminding us that this is not something new, but we've been failed by the leadership to think big. And I think part of that is not having a mayor that can understand it through practice and through daily use. And I do not drive around the city. That this is how I commute through the city of New York, and I'm not alone. More and more people are getting on. So as the mayor, I want to really focus on removing our dependence on cars in spaces in Manhattan. And that's going to take an incredible investment and massive engineer, architecture, and construction at the tune of billions of dollars. And I think that the federal government will come in, but the city has the obligation to set the stage and bring in a phase one. The state and the federal government can come in later. And on the politics side, I want to say that what's important is that we're getting a new president. We have new energy in Albany as well, with the new Senate majority. And so if you understand the politics of all of this, things are beginning to shift, and new infrastructure will be able to come in. New infrastructure investment will be able to come in, but the city needs to set the table.
How about the MTA? Talk to us a little bit about the MTA.
Well, this is one of those things that I wish the mayor had more, and the city of New York had more power over our subways. And what we need to do is really kind of rethink how we bring that back into control at the city of New York. That's a long-term project, but I want to ensure that the city does its part to invest. And so part of these billions will go into trains, into train stations, to ensure that what I want to do is focus on accessibility. I think that's one of the things that we never talk about, accessibility in our train stations. And to Cuomo's credit, we saw some of those upgrades in the district in Sunset Park on 4th Avenue, getting elevators for our seniors, which are growing. The number of people who are aging in our city are growing, and we need them to be able to access. And so if you ask me where I would focus our capital funding, it'd be for accessibility. And those are elevators. When you're talking about engineers, that's what we're talking about. Putting elevators that never existed before is a big task. We need the smartest people in our city to be able to design and to construct that work. And that's going to require money. So that's where I would focus the investment in.
Great. And are you committed to supporting the extension of the 2nd Avenue subway and hopefully the eventual extension of the 2 or the 3 train into Canarsie and into transit deserts? I know that's been studied, but we need a mayor to work with the governor and the federal government to really push for these projects to move forward. Obviously, the city has a small role in that, but
it does, and this is part of the problem. Like, I think that if we can take over public transit in the city of New York, then we're talking something different. But if you're asking me that, the prime question you're asking me is, will I spend billions of dollars in public transportation? Absolutely.
right.
Uh, and so the sky's the limit when we can actually bring that investment in, that I think that we can, and that this mayor has not utilized the capital budget because he doesn't understand that we can actually borrow massive amounts of money right now to get these projects to work.
At the lowest interest rates we've ever seen before, which is
Now is
amazing.
the time. Now is the
So,
time.
so Carlos, in your district, you represent an incredible waterfront. You represent incredible people, one of the most diverse districts anywhere in the world, I think. But you also represent the biggest eyesore, I think, anywhere in New York City, and that's the Gowanus Expressway. And for decades, there have been discussions about what do we do? You know, it clearly is not just an eyesore and a blighted relic of a different transportation era, but it affects people's lives. It affects people's health. It affects people's asthma rates and doesn't allow for open spaces and et cetera. Um, we happen to tomorrow or Thursday will be getting a majority leader in the U.S. Senate
That's right.
who to be from Brooklyn, who happens to be somebody we know very well. Uh,
Yes.
and is this the moment for Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to say, I'm ready to, you want to talk Green New Deal? Well, I've got the best project that will eliminate and create jobs and opportunity and justice for people that have lived under this eyesore. Tell me look, I talk about that because clearly it's a project that I love. Polly Trottenberg is going to be appointed or has been appointed and will be voted in as the #2 at USDOT. This is a project that was important to her. Tell us what you're thinking. It's a project you look at every day. How do we solve the worst traffic nightmare in New York, which is the BQE and the Gowanus under the next mayors?
We have to bury it. And there are a lot of options here that can transform and reconnect the waterfront to a community that has been removed from it. And I'm talking about the working waterfront on the Sunset Park waterfront and the upland housing community. And so not only are we going to get a massive amount of jobs, but with an incredible investment, we can transform this iron curtain that has removed people and has endangered the lives of so many folks. I look at this through, so we get the economic development project
Right.
here, but I want to bring everybody on the ground, and the things that we have been dealing with are the massive amounts of deaths that have occurred along the Third Avenue corridor underneath this iron dragon. And what we understand is that we can actually transform how people move through it, not just traffic and asthma rates, but recreate public space for potentially even more housing that we can build across this corridor that is affordable. And so this is one of those transformational projects that will require a federal government
Yeah.
investment. And so now is the time. So not only can the city do its own piece, a first phase of a Green New Deal, we can actually begin to uh, usher in a massive federal works project. And I think that this is the time. And not only that, I want to say a couple more things. What we are seeing is a massive shift in how we bring in goods. And so the maritime component at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and at Red Hook Terminal really give us a new opportunity to think about trucks. And so we can actually think about how we move goods through our city in a more efficient way. And that has to include, it's not just changing the trucks and making them electric. It's about changing the actual roadways that they're on. And that includes the Gowanus Expressway.
Well, we love the idea of a massive federal infrastructure project that will employ literally 100,000 people. But we love even more the idea of an open space Third Avenue with parks and bike lanes and
Yes.
in safety and additional schools and maybe a corridor, maybe the first of its kind redevelopment after you tear down an expressway that includes a 100% affordable housing component of every building that goes up. And I know we have builders ready to rock and roll on that. So I wanna, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about land use and a
Yes.
couple of controversies, at least in our world, right? Particularly Amazon and Industry City. And I know you took a position on both, one of which is in your district. So maybe give us a sense of your vision on land use and rezonings, and then tell us your take on Industry City, because clearly we were supportive of it, and I know many people were, and you had a different vision for it. So we'd love to hear from you on it.
So I think that the most important thing about Industry City is that we tried. Our community was very much invested in understanding it, and we did all our homework to really understand what was happening at Industry City. And that the biggest failure wasn't Industry City; it was the city of New York. We were asking for massive amounts of development, infrastructure investment in and around Industry City that would protect and mitigate against the harmful impacts of gentrification that was already happening in the neighborhood, in our a very working families immigrant community. We were asking for a school, a STEAM center, the kind that we just saw built over at the Navy Yard, that would allow for young people to be intimately connected to the future workforce. All of these, and there were so many other ideas. My main point was that the city of New York, the mayor, refused to understand this as an opportunity. And any project that doesn't have that kind of investment from the city of New York, because land use is a city procedure, that a neighborhood and a community and a city will give power in and investment opportunities for a private entity like Industry City. And when the city failed to do that, this was not the right time to say yes. And this is about leadership. And this is what's animating me and exciting me to be the next mayor of the city, so that I can understand that communities need to be whole as much as a private developer, and that we can't have one without the other. And I'm very serious about that. And we lost an opportunity here to do something very big and beautiful. And until we have new leadership, I don't think that's going to change. And this is connected to some of my first comments, that I hope that the private community here's a different message, not just from me, but from our neighborhoods, that while power is shifting, we're electing more people who are thinking like I am to connect to communities and begin the process with our neighborhoods, so that we can go to and into a city process like a ULURP that needs massive reform, and we can get stuff done. That's how we unlock the conundrum that we're in right now. And Industry City just didn't do that either. They didn't have the mayor on board. He didn't understand it. And that was a mistake I think that we can all learn from.
So how do we ensure that the next mayor um, ensures that companies and entities that want to be in New York feel like there's a home for them? And how do you say to any business from around the world that says, I want to invest in New York, what's your strategy going to be to say to them, we want you here? Now, there are some things you're going to have to do to be here, but we're not going to turn you away. What does a Mayor Menchaca do to get businesses to stay here and come here?
The best thing that the city of New York can do to send a signal across the entire world is to invest massive amounts of capital infrastructure money to the vision that we just talked about in the last 30 minutes. That, I think, is the signal. With that one investment, we'll ensure that our artists, our immigrant workers, our families, our essential workers are taken care of, and maintain the culture and the spirit of the city. And I think that I have no doubt we're going to be able to get through this. Like you, I believe in this city. I love this city, and the message here will be empty. This last budget that the mayor gave is an empty promise of a future that we can have with the investment and the ability to build, and invest in this economic engine. And so that's it. It's really simple. And until we do that, we are going to stay where we are,
Well, we
frozen
love that you
and
want to
stuck.
spend a lot of money on rebuilding. We think it's
Public
important.
money. I want to
We
spend a lot of public money.
love public money being spent.
That's
But
the way through.
before we move to our final kind of third bucket, I want to just close the loop on land use. So mayor clearly has a massive authority over the land use and the rezonings of the city. What's the mayor Menchaca vision for a citywide land use policy, if you have one?
Yeah. So much of what happens causes incredible distrust in our communities who are activated, who are bringing political power. And so the first thing that we need to do is build out a pre-ULURP process that allows for what I just talked about, for a developer to work with communities to design and work together to design the future of whatever that piece of property is. So that there are open conversations, and this is what we did in industry cities conversation. We brought communities together so that people can understand it. The problem with industry city was that they constructed their plan before coming to community. They came to community and sold it, which is the wrong process. I know that people have private property, but if they want to change the use of that property, they have to come to communities first. And so building out a pre-ULURP process. Second is that we need a comprehensive planning exercise in the city of New York, where we can signal to investors and to our own capital budget where we want to grow, where we want to bring more education facilities, where we want to do more resiliency. And that's a long-term process. It's like a 5-6 year exercise. But once we have that, then we can signal to anyone who wants to come to the city, this is how you're going to come in. That the city of New York, the people who stayed here, the people that didn't flee, the people that want to see this next chapter of the city of New York, construct a comprehensive plan. And so ULURP doesn't just need to be reformed. We need a comprehensive planning process we've been talking about in the city council. And we can spend a whole next 30 minutes or another 30 minutes on just that. And there are some candidates who are connected to that movement.
Well, we are, obviously for both the building sector and the real estate sector, land use is a critical component of the future of New York. So we'll look forward to having further conversations.
And it doesn't work. It clearly doesn't work. It doesn't work right now. It doesn't work for the private sector. It doesn't work for our neighborhoods. And so something has to change. And that's just the reality. And if we can acknowledge that and change it and co-build, we will see some and invest.
And invest, exactly.
None of it will happen if we do not invest.
As whoever the next mayor is, and clearly this is something important to you, as the discussion on what a land use, a ULURP restructuring looks like, again, include the private sectors and the people that are building as part of the discussion.
Absolutely.
Not just, hey, here's the new plan and we hope you like it, and if you don't, too bad.
Yep.
But
100%.
The rebuilding of the next phase of ULURP. Some of it has to be charter mandated. The next mayor will create 1 or 2 charter commissions to look at the future of New York and what that looks like. But again, include the private sector as part of it. So I think the final piece of the puzzle, so we talked about COVID, we talked about economic development and building, and now let's talk a little bit about social and racial inequalities, and how do we help build a better New York moving forward?
A better New York moving forward. I think, and we spent so much time really thinking about the folks that you represent, the people who are connected to incredible understanding of engineering and construction, and so you all need to be at the table, no doubt. But what I think is as critical for a better New York is understanding what COVID did to all of us. If I'm at home right now, I'm in my home. Our offices are not open, not until we get to a place where we can be safe. I am not alone. Many of us are now in our neighborhoods, and so really understanding that the social psychological impact to that, I think, is going to be important. And so mental health is going to be we're going to have to rethink how we understand this this pandemic and the impacts to our communities. So for me, that's important, mental health. And then the bigger idea that I have is something we've been building here in the city, or in my city council district, which is a connection of telemedicine opportunities for people that do not have healthcare. I'm talking about immigrants and public housing residents. And so what I like to do is bring technology to really solve the gaps between people that are at home that have to work at home or have no work, who are unemployed, connected to telemedicine. And so I'm working with a group of people to think about how everyone can at least have telemedicine access in another crisis and as a primary care relationship. And everyone should have access to that. And if we can remove healthcare from our work and really build it into our experience of our neighborhood so that we can walk to a clinic, or get on a telemedicine opportunity, uh, things can get better. And I'm talking about therapy, mental health, and uh, and healthcare. And so those are the things that I'm really excited about in this race, and what I will be talking about as we lead to June.
Well, great. It sounds like a lot of priorities. We had a question from one of our listeners or watchers,
Yes.
all listeners, watchers, viewers, but one of the many people watching, um, uh, that you about your reference to green energy and the green economy. Um, do you have have you thought about, does Rikers Island become a future green tech hub? Can Industry City be a future green tech hub? And if not, what's your vision for Industry City if you're mayor?
Okay, so Rikers, yes, I am actually part of a bill that is in support of a transformation of a piece of property called Rikers. I support the closing of Rikers. It is an institution that connects us all to the understanding of cages and caging our fellow New Yorkers. And so I think Rikers needs to close, and we can build uh, an island of energy. So yes, I support that. As far as Industry City, I think Industry City is going to have to come back to us as a neighborhood and rethink. I think they're on their mission to build out this luxury mall, but some of the most creative ideas have come from our young people that have thought about our relationship with a private development like Industry City as a place for food manufacturing. And I think that when we're talking about uh, green industry, we're not just talking about the things that I guess the best way to describe it is upgrades, are upgrading our infrastructure. We're also talking about how we upgrade our agriculture, and Industry City could be a great place for that. But we're going to have to work together. What I would never want to do is impose this kind of conversation. I think we got to do it together. And I think that was the problem that we had with Industry City from the beginning. The most beautiful thing about what's happening at Industry City is across the street from Industry City, we just saw the governor approve massive amount of development, infrastructure money for an offshore wind site. That's what we're talking about. Is the future of our energy system is building out those spaces. And had we not done what we did in 2014, which is to secure that piece of property as a maritime piece of property, we would have never had this opportunity for offshore wind infrastructure. And that's just the beginning that I see across all the waterfront. And so Industry City is just one piece of a larger pie of city-owned property along Sunset Park.
Great.
And so that's what I'm seeing. And I think what we didn't talk too much about is really utilizing the water as well.
Right. Now, let's talk about the water. So, one of the mayor's signature success stories was the ferry. Um, Tell us about your vision for the waterfront. And then also somebody had a question, and it's probably tied together. How does an EDC look like under your administration? What's their role?
Well, I think what you can look at is how EDC has changed under my administration as council member in Sunset Park. What we had before at EDC was an EDC that didn't have a portfolio manager for Sunset Park. In a big battle with EDC in 2014, 2015, I asked them to restructure themselves to bring more accountability to the portfolio of Sunset Park and connect it to community. We built a task force that allowed for for everyone in the neighborhood to be able to have access to the visioning of the future and accountability. So we need accountability. EDC, I think, often feels unaccountable to neighborhoods. That needs to change. EDC is a city animal. And I know it has a lot more power than other city agencies, but it still needs accountability. And those investments need to come back into our neighborhood. And so EDC looks like what EDC is now in Sunset Park: accountable, connected, uh, uh, co-visioning, co-building with neighborhoods so that we can see the value of our city-owned property. And the Brooklyn Army Terminal, Bush Terminal, these are all South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. These are all things that are now celebrated in a big way. We're not there yet, but I think you can see EDC change in that way. That the bottom line isn't just profit; it's also community engagement. And when we're talking about a Green New Deal, EDC will have to be part of connecting the pipeline for workforce development. And that's what I see EDC doing.
Great. So let's talk about the waterfront. Tell us your vision for the waterfront of New York. We are, after all, a water city.
We are, and it's hard because people don't even understand it that way. I think people really see a sense of disappointment when we think about the water. People can't access it. And in Sunset Park, we have two. Well, in Red Hook as well, we have two ferry infrastructure. What I want to see are more and different size abilities for ferrying people and goods. What I see from what advocates call the blue space is a massive economic engine that can move goods and services. What I see more is more barging. What you see at the Red Hook terminal are barges that bring stuff that could be on a truck, but instead are on a water barge. I want to see a lot more of that happening to and through the ports that are on the New Jersey side. Next, I want to see more ability for the transport of people. And so we already seen NYC Ferry connect people. We need to see more investment in that. And I know that we just talked about transportation. We need more of that connection and more points and location. We only have 2 spots right now in Sunset Park and Red Hook in the district. But when we look at everything, we need more nodes for people to connect and potentially bring in MWBE opportunities for companies to be able to use the waterways. And then finally, what has been really interesting is there's some big thinkers that are thinking about using drones for the transport of goods into our last mile delivery, which is a big boom right now, which is going to bring a lot of trucks. And so we can bring more goods in through our waterfront access, and what was that?
I said, and including innovative ideas
Well,
like drone technology in New York is so behind what some places in the world are doing.
and I know that it's scary and all that, but I think that part of my administration is going to be working with NASA and other folks that are already 10 steps ahead, to really help us think through and work with your engineers and work with everybody to understand how we can use the waterways to get more trucks off our streets. And that's been a big part of the big conversation, when we're looking at that big problem in Brooklyn Heights that I know that you were leading for a big
A
way.
lot of time
Um,
on.
Oversized and heavier trucks are part of the problem of our aging infrastructure. And so not only do we need to bury the goannas, we need to rethink about how we bring goods into our neighborhoods. And part of that might be through a super highway of drones that can move goods. And so those are the kind of things that I think can be not only innovative, but can get young people excited about and start designing. And
Right.
so that future is coming faster than we know.
We agree. We believe that future is here already. And if I like to give an example of LaGuardia Airport, which is undergoing an incredible redevelopment, and there'll be an air train at some point. But we forget that LaGuardia happens to be on water. Imagine if you had a every 15-minute ferry taking you from LaGuardia to Manhattan, LaGuardia to Brooklyn, LaGuardia to the Bronx, right? And as part of just a constant messaging that if you get off in LaGuardia, you can be in downtown Brooklyn in 20 minutes by ferry, or in Midtown, or in the South Bronx by ferry. I think enormous opportunities on our waterway.
We're not using our water at all. And there's some big thinkers out there, and we need to bring them in. And but none of this will happen without investment. This is everything we talked about. And this mayor isn't doing it. And I think that there are other candidates that are not understanding the value of a city municipal, I'm calling it a Green New Deal, municipal investment at the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. We can do that. We have to.
We agree. Well, Carlos Menchaca, it is 11 o'clock. We can go on
Yes.
hours, but we won't.
Thank you.
I say thank you again for being with us. You are our second mayoral candidate to join us, and we have a schedule of all of the candidates coming up in the coming months. Let me thank again Langen Engineering, George Leventus for being our sponsor today, and Carlos. We wish you well,
Thank you.
and know that no matter what happens, you will continue to speak your voice and share your ideas and your vision for New York City moving forward. And it's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank
So,
you.
Kaka, thank you for your time today. And everybody, we look forward to our next Espresso with Carlo. And don't forget to sign up for our annual meeting, which is on January 28th. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.